Good morning. The subject of this video is that people are using words and they don't know what they mean. The first and most common one that I hear all the time is the word fascist and fascism being thrown about. Trump is a fascist. Republicans are fascists. If you're a conservative, you're a fascist. You're a Nazi, whatever. Um, Many of these people hurling that accusation, they're using it as a pejorative, and they really don't know what the word means. They don't really know what a fascist is, and they really don't understand what fascism actually entails. Um, you'll hear people say that, oh, so and so is a Nazi. Um, it's a reference to I guess, the Third Reich. The people 90 years ago in Germany, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Um, that's basically Nazis, an acronym for that. Um, what did they basically believe in? They believed in top-down national control. Yes, they were nationalists, but they were nationalists combined with a form of socialism. Um, Many of the people who advocate socialism, especially in the United States, they advocate socialism on a national level that kind of makes them a lot closer to national socialists than they might think. Now, I'm not saying they want to start rounding up people and putting them in camps and having big ovens and all that kind of thing. No, not at all. I'm not insinuating that at all. But the common thread, the common belief today is that uh, fascism and communism are polar opposites. That's not really true. That they're not really opposite end of the spectrum. They're more like evil twin siblings. A communist or a Bolshevik or Stalinist or Leninist, somebody in that vein, uh, you put them next to somebody who's a National Socialist, and they're going to disagree violently on the means, but they're going to agree very strongly on the ends, which is tyranny. For the average Berliner in the 1940s and the average Muscovite, their lives really were not all that different. Um, the communists believed that the state owned everything. There was no private property. You could probably have personal property, your clothing and stuff like that. But generally, there was no private property. You didn't own real estate. You didn't own a business. You didn't own your own home. Under In Nazi Germany, you could own private property. You could even own a business. You could make a profit, but the state still had the supreme authority over how you ran that business and what you made. If you had a business making, well, they didn't have them, but let's say you had a business making air conditioners and filing cabinets. Somebody from the Ministry of Production or whatever they would call it would come in and tell you, you're going to build trucks and tanks for the Wehrmacht. You're going to build military equipment. Well, you couldn't really refuse, but you would do as the government said. You would obey their orders. You would follow their quotas and whatnot, but you still owned the business. You could still make a profit so long as you did what the state wanted. In the Soviet Union, the state was the business. The state was everything. Um, if you ran afoul of the government in the Third Reich, you would end up in Auschwitz or Dachau or someplace like that. You would end up in a concentration camp where you'd be unalived. If you ran afoul of the government in Soviet Russia, you ended up in a gulag out in Siberia. But basically the end result was the same. But in modern times, you'll hear people, especially people who, are either center left or far left, they will refer to people they don't like. They'll use a pejorative as, a fascist or a Nazi or whatnot. But if you look at the government structure of Germany in the 1930s, they were either going to fall to communism or they were going to fall to the Nazis. They had um, basically there was nowhere in their political system for libertarians, constitutional conservatives, federalism, or anything like that we have in the United States. There wasn't really much of a place for what we would know as Democrats or Republicans. Yes, I know the Germans had the SPD and they did have different parties over there. I get that. But generally, they were going to go one way or the other. And Hitler was actually advertised as being an alternative to communism because, the Soviet Union had fallen to communism, and, Marxism and his ideas were spreading to other places. And Germany was ripe for that at the time. But nevertheless, you look at somebody in the United States who is on the left end of the spectrum. You look at somebody like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, um, people of that persuasion, and they want socialism on a national level. They want federal control over healthcare, education, retirement, housing, transportation, agriculture, banking, communications, you name it. Now, do they really have a whole lot of difference between them and some of the people 90 years ago in Germany? Well, they don't really they don't advocate the same kind of violence, but if they had absolute control of the government, who knows? They certainly don't like the First Amendment. John Kerry recently even said that the First Amendment is an obstruction to their agenda. And he's a big left-wing globalist type. Um, and they obviously hate the Second Amendment. They're always trying to disarm Americans whenever they can. Um, they don't much like the Fourth Amendment. They don't really like the Fifth Amendment. They don't care about the 10th Amendment either. So, they need to be very careful when they throw names around like that. Um, you have a situation where, if you're, I will tell somebody that my philosophy, I'm sort of a libertarianish independent. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. In some ways, I'm so far to the right, I'm between Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun. But in other ways, I'm kind of in the middle. But I don't really follow a particular party. I was a member of the Libertarian Party for 25 years, but the party kind of went off the rails and became a caricature of itself. I still have a lot of libertarian beliefs, but I'm not an orthodox or ideological libertarian. But if I tell somebody I want fewer regulations, I want more free markets, less government involvement, lower taxes, then they'll say, "Well, you're a fascist." What? It's just they don't even know what the word means. A lot of these people, I don't know if it's focus groups, I don't know if they learn it in school or what. They just throw the term out there, or they'll say, "We have to save our. You're a danger to democracy." Well, the United States, we're not really a democracy per se. We're not a social democracy. We're a constitutional republic. And basically, we use the democratic process. But the only thing in our government that is really a democracy is the House of Representatives. Well, now the Senate since the 17th Amendment. But originally, the founding fathers had it set up so that the only people directly elected by the people were the House of Representatives. The Senate, the members of the Senate were actually appointed by the legislature of each state. Um, and they were appointed on staggered terms. Around 1915, I think it was, we had the 17th Amendment, which provided for direct election of U.S. senators. That was a very bad idea. And in my opinion, it was a very bad idea for them to do that, because it gave birth to the professional political class, where people, get elected to the Senate and they're 40, 50 years. They say that you only leave the Senate in two ways, either in cuffs or in a coffin. And with some of these people like Dianne Feinstein, John McCain, Jesse Helms, and others, that happened to be the case. They died while they were in office. Ted Kennedy. But the House of Representatives is supposed to be the people's house. And the president is directly elected by the people, but is actually chosen by the Electoral College. That was another check on a direct democracy. The founding fathers did not want to have a popular vote elect the president, or he would be chosen by 5 or 6 major metro areas and the rest of the country would be screwed. So the Electoral College, a lot of people hate it, but it was put there for good reason. Then we have the judiciary, the Supreme Court, not elected. Now, some states like Pennsylvania, they do elect judges, but the federal judiciary, they're all appointed. We don't vote for judges. Some states can do things by ballot initiative or a referendum to pass a constitutional amendment, but we don't do that on the federal level. The founding fathers are very wise when they did this. But nevertheless, I'm going off on a tangent there, but I think that people throw these words around and they really don't stop and think what they mean. And if somebody says, well, you're a fascist, it's like, that's like the end of our, it's like calling somebody a racist. Okay. You really don't have any, you can't really back it up with facts. I mean, unless the guy's wearing a Klan robe or something, but they just use that. That's supposed to be something that shuts down the argument. It's like, well, you can't say, oh, somebody's a fascist, this, that, and bad, while you're espousing Marxist or communist ideology. Um, you can't go calling somebody a fascist and then put on your black outfit and you're carrying a flag that's red, white, and black, just like the flags in 1930s Germany. You wear similar uniforms, you carry clubs and weapons, you're just acting like the brown shirts. So when people like that, Antifa or whatever they call them, they're supposed to be anti-fascist, but quite often they act like fascists. Some of them act like Bolsheviks, but there's really not much of a difference between the two of them. But nevertheless, enough about that. Another word you hear tossed about now, that if you oppose having males playing in against females in contact sports, well, now they call you a misogynist. Now, just think about the irony of that for a minute. You want to protect girls and women in sports from having to compete with men. And that's what they are. I mean, I get it. People identify as something, that's fine. But, you know, you're a male and you can chop things off and add things to you and grow your hair long and paint your nails. You're never going to be a female. You're a male, and vice versa. But nevertheless, it's like if you say, well, I have a daughter who plays high school sports and I don't want to have a boy in the locker room showering with her. Oh, you're a misogynist. It's like, and the one now is trans women or women too. Well, you're playing hard and fast and loose with the definition of words, but I don't wish any ill will on somebody, but you have the recent kerfluffle up in Maine, about the governor of Maine got into a spat with Trump. Well, truth be told, if we lived under federalism and we followed the 10th Amendment, that never would have happened, because I think the whole issue is beneath the president anyway. But the president couldn't say, I'm going to withhold federal funds from you. Well, there shouldn't even be any federal funds for schools within Maine, because education is not an enumerated power of the federal government. Now, you could argue there's a certain role to be played with um, schools, service academy schools, the Naval Academy in Annapolis, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, the Coast Guard Academy in Connecticut, and whatnot. Yes, that's military education. That's sort of different. And maybe for the children of military personnel on military bases overseas, or even military bases in the United States, you could argue that that should fall under the federal government, Department of Defense. But for your average schools, the federal government should not be involved in your local high school, your elementary school, your grade school, even your state universities. Those are supposed to be funded by jurisdictional taxes within your state. And then the argument is, well, we can't get by without federal money. We need that. Well, you wouldn't need that federal money if the money never went to the federal government in the first place. If you ran things under jurisdictional taxation, which was one of the intents of the 10th Amendment, you wouldn't want the federal government meddling in your high school library, just like you wouldn't want your governor of Idaho declaring war on Portugal. We have division of government not only horizontally with Article 1, 2, and 3, and the three branches of government who all serve as a check on each other, But we also have vertical separation of government. You have your township, your locality, your city, your borough, however your state is set up. And then you've got things that are a little bigger. You've got the county. Okay. Your local governments handle your local stuff, your police, fire, stuff like that. Your county government might handle some of the road maintenance, your school system, your sheriff, your jail, um, your zoning, things like that. And then if you go up higher than that, then you have the state, which handles your state prison, your state police. Um, it handles disputes between counties, and you've got your own court system at the state level. And if you go above that, then you have the federal level. The federal government is only supposed to be doing a very few things. There are 18 enumerated powers in the United States Constitution, contained in Article 1, Section 8. And the 10th Amendment reserves everything else to the states. So, we have a situation where our federal government is big and it's bloated and it's doing 5,000 things it's not supposed to do. So therefore it can't do the 18 things that it is supposed to do. And unfortunately, the education in our country of civics, economics, and history sucks. There's no other way to put it. It sucks. Most kids don't know that. Um, if we followed the Constitution, it wouldn't really matter who the president was to most of us unless we were at war. The main job of the president is to be commander in chief of the armed forces. Um, it would matter more who your state's governor was and who your state legislators were. That should be more important. To most people, the federal government shouldn't matter because they're supposed to control, patrol and secure the borders, negotiate foreign treaties, fight wars, settle disputes between the states. These things are all enumerated in the Constitution. I believe that's in Article 4, which is the relationship with the federal government and each state. But I don't even think they teach the Constitution in school anymore. I mean, we did when I was younger, but even then they told us what was in it, but they really didn't delve very much into why. You know, that's important to know for good citizenship. And I get so frustrated watching people go off the rails and throwing these things around. And, another one, they don't know what the word means. They'll say budget cut. Well, if you have an agency and you're the Federal Department of Redundancy Department, and you have a budget of $120 million, and you want to increase it to 140 million, okay? Instead of let's say you're at 120 million, you want to go to 140 million, but they only increase it to 130 million. Well, in Washington speak, you'll say they cut our budget by 10 million. Well, no, you increased it by 20 million. Or you wanted an increase of 20 million, you only increased it by 10 million. So in Washington speak, that becomes a cut. We're at a point now where we are. Another thing people get mixed up: deficit and debt. People will conflate those two terms. They will also conflate legal immigration with illegal immigration. So that if you say you're against illegal immigration, they'll say, well, you hate brown people, or you're against all immigration. And that's not true. But they do the same thing with deficit and debt. The debt is the accumulated debt that grows every single administration. The deficit is the annual shortfall between revenue and expenditures. Right now, there's also the unfunded future liabilities that nobody ever talks about. Right now, that's about 180 to 220 trillion, depending on the think tank you trust. If you look at the national debt is pushing 37 trillion. We have 180 to 220 trillion in unfunded future liabilities. And the federal government is adding approximately 1 trillion more dollars to the debt, more debt to the pile. Almost about every 100 days, another trillion gets added. The interest, okay, by the end of this calendar year, the interest alone on the debt, not counting principal, is $1.2 trillion. That's for 1 year. That's about 20 to 25% larger than the entire defense budget. This is not sustainable. We can't tax our way out of this. We can't borrow our way out of it. Can't borrow your way out of debt. And we certainly can't just keep printing money and handing that out to service the debt. You're not going to have organic economic growth by expanding the money supply. That's like pumping water from the deep end of the lake into the shallow end of the lake. We got some serious issues. Can Trump solve it? I'm not very optimistic. I think he's trying. He might be trying. I don't know. He would be better off using a scalpel, and he seems to want to use a sledgehammer. We do need to make cuts. The Doge thing, I agree with it, but I think we could be a little more diligent. What's going to happen is they're just going cutting things now. What he should be doing is more of an audit. Like, this is where the expenditures are. This is where we're spending money. Draw it all out and say, this is where we need to cut, and then make the cuts. It's almost like he's putting the cart in front of the horse. But the president does have, he is privy to information that we are not. So I don't want to say trust the guy, but maybe trust but verify, see where this shakes up. My wife happens to be a federal government employee, so we're watching this very carefully. There's, as the old saying goes, no raindrop is responsible for the flood, and no single snowflake is responsible for the avalanche. But if they come out and say USAID is only 1% of the federal budget, well, a lot of people are going to hear that and say, oh, that's not that much. But thinking individuals are going to hear that and say, if that's only 1% of the federal budget, then the federal government is way too big. And it's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democrat thing. But, we are, to borrow a phrase from Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren, we're in big trouble. My grandson is not yet 5 months old, and he has about $100,000 of debt on his back that he didn't have a darn thing to do with creating a dime of it. And this is what we're doing. People are saying, well, we don't want to hurt our senior citizens. Okay, as somebody who's encroaching on senior citizen territory now, I agree with that. But does that mean you're going to screw over their grandchildren and their great-great-grandchildren and so on? I mean, we're running a situation where we're running the risk of impoverishing the next 4 or 5 generations. It took us a long time to get into this mess, and we're not going to get out of it very quickly. But if we can show fiscal discipline and sound monetary policy, if we can be working towards both of those, it's going to boost our net worth in the eyes of the world, because they will have more faith and credit in the United States government. The government is the only entity that can print more money. They can print more dollars. A CEO can't do it. A private businessman can't do it. You and I can't do it. It would be called counterfeiting. But the government can legally counterfeit their own money. They have the power to print currency. Now, as much as I think the Federal Reserve is a problem, we're stuck with it for now until they find a way to audit it or get rid of it and return the responsibility for coining money to Congress where it's supposed to be. We're stuck with it, and maybe they should audit it. But basically, it's a private bank. The Federal Reserve System, it's not federal. They don't have any reserves, but it is a system. We've got a lot of soul searching in this country to do, and it's not going to be Republicans who are going to fix it. It's not going to be Democrats who are going to fix it. It's going to be the American people holding our elected officials responsible, hold their feet to the fire, make them promise to fix what those before them have broken. This kick the can down the road stuff is only going to work for so long. Eventually, it's like musical chairs. The music stops, and there's not enough chairs. Think of the United States as being a ship of state. We're headed for the iceberg, and we're like the Titanic going to the iceberg. Nobody's slowing down the throttle. Nobody's steering around it. The Democrats insist on rearranging the chairs. The Republicans want to tell you that we need to polish the brass. They're telling the band to keep on playing, and they're popping open more champagne. There's not enough lifeboats. We're in some serious trouble. And the United States isn't the only place. They've got a lot of problems in Europe going on too. Maybe that's why their election, maybe that's why the AfD came in second place. I lived in Germany for a couple of years. We just came back in the fall, and they've got some issues going over there. But anyway, when you hear people use these words, you just have to think. You have to think about it and think, well, what do they really mean by that? Where's the evidence of that? And call them out. If somebody says, well, Trump is a fascist, ask them to define what fascism is and ask them to tell you what he is doing that's fascism. Normally in a fascist government, the person who is a fascist leader is not going to want to look into expenditures. They're not going to look into cutting the government. They're not going to look into, um, you know, uh, looking into abuses of power or people who have been on the take. Usually, under fascism, the people are all in on it together, and they're going to try to not be transparent. They're going to try to hide things. So just, yeah, I know he's a narcissistic bully. He's the bull in the china shop, and sometimes we're the china. I get that. But just when you hear people use these words, or, if you want to protect females playing female sports, that does not make you a misogynist. That makes you the opposite of a misogynist. The misogynist is the person who wants the 6 foot tall boy to play against your 5'7" daughter in a contact sport. That's the person who's the misogynist. So, don't let when I know all politicians do this, but the left has been really good at redefining words. They get control of the lexicon and they twist it around. So, they'll put something that, well, if you oppose this, you want children to starve. If you oppose the Federal Department of Education, you don't want people to learn anything. If you oppose the USDA food stamp program, then you want children to go hungry. If you oppose draconian gun control, then you want more school shootings. They get this. If you want any you want tax reform. Oh, you just want billionaires to pay less taxes. They have this. It's like the talking GI Joe. You pull a string and an answer comes out, and you have to fight them, right. You have to fight back against that when they do that, because what they're doing is they're controlling the narrative. Even if it's a false one, they're pushing it. And some of these people are really, really good at it. Watch what happens on one of these talking head shows. If you get somebody who tries to counter that, they will shut them down. They disconnect their mic. They shout over them. They cancel them. I mean, they're very good at this. And they will try to stifle free speech. They'll try to stifle an opposing viewpoint while they call you a fascist. Just keep in mind, pay attention to what they say, but watch what they do. Have a good day, people.